Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nunez Nucci podcast. I'm super excited about this guest because we got to meet in person, which is kind of rare these days. He's based out of Seoul. David Tizzard, PhD in Korean Studies, professor at Seoul Women's University and Hanyang University. But here's a catch. He is not even a catch. He is the host of Korea Deconstructed. And that's actually first how I heard about him. So I want him to talk about his podcast. It's awesome. He's also a weekly columnist for the Korea Times. I am an open admirer, David, and I made it clear because I reached out to him, folks, back last spring, summer, when I wanted to meet him because I was reading his stuff. I saw his podcast, and we did indeed get to meet. It was in Itaewon. I wanted to say that. So it has a little different ring to it at a really great restaurant that I want to talk to you a little bit about how that's doing. But David, welcome. So excited to have you.
It's great to see you. I always love your energy. I love your vibe, and very thankful to be here, and it's just always great to speak with you.
Yeah, so thank you for joining me. So let's talk about your work. First, how I first discovered you was your podcast. But I want to know how that came about because it's Korea Deconstructed, and you also had me on your podcast. We talked about Woo, which was great to talk about. But let's talk about your work. How did you come to Seoul? Let me just point this out. British male, just saying, right? Studying PhD in Korean studies. Very impressive to me. Yeah. You know more, you probably speak Korean better than I do. And so all of that I want to point out, and I love it. I love seeing that. For me, it's great representation and diversity. So tell me how you got to what you're doing today.
Well, yeah, it's a huge question. There's long answers, short answers. There's media-friendly answers and things like that. When I finished my undergraduate degree in the south of England, I was working in a music venue, and I was having a great time. Every night I was seeing bands come through. One night it would be James Blunt, next night Radiohead, next night Slipknot. And I was standing there every week and I was like, this is so amazing. And every night was a party. I was having a whale of a time. But I realized that parties can't last forever. And if they did, I was digging myself towards an early grave with my lifestyle. So I decided, let's go to the other side of the world and see what happens. And so I didn't even really pack a suitcase. I just jumped on a plane, and I've traveled a lot, to be honest, before. So I'd spent a lot of time in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan. I'd been to all these places, but I'd never been to South Korea. So I decided, let's go there. And this place is like Hotel California. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. I'm still here all these years later. Once I was here, I developed an absolute love and admiration for the people. And I felt that it was my responsibility to embrace this culture, this civilization, by learning their language, by learning their customs, by learning, not coming here as an Englishman, but trying to embrace that way of life. And I tried to do it empathetically and understanding, and also to be informed. And so to be informed, I pursued a master's degree, and I did a master's at Sejong University in Asian Studies, all the classics of philosophy and things like that. I was doing all the Taoism. I got really into Taoism for a long time, big believer in Taoism. And then I decided to keep going with a PhD in Korean Studies. And so what I was really trying to do, just the short answer is here, I wanted the real life experience with the people and the culture, and also the informed background and knowledge and history and theory. So I wanted to bring it all together. And there's probably not many people in South Korea these days that will spend Friday night playing an underground stoner rock show in the heart of Seoul, and then Saturday night having dinner with ambassadors and giving lectures on Korean studies. So I've somehow managed to make that my life, and it's working.
That is so cool. I heard some of this, but by the way, I want to check out some of your live music. So make sure when I come back, I get to hear you. So what made you stay? I know that you said Hotel California. It was fun. You fell in love, but you fell in love with the people. But then what was it about Korea that you felt like you could stay and build a life there, and then obviously become an expert in your field in Korean studies?
Yeah. There's so many reasons. The people is a vitally important part of why I'm here. I love the Korean people. Sometimes you read articles online and there's a lot of dystopia about Korea, mental health, loneliness, and these suicide, gender problems, and these stories seem to resonate so well in the West.
Yeah.
When I walk through the streets of Seoul, it's pretty nice here. The people are great. Korea is safe for the most part. You can get on the subway. You don't worry about being shot up in a mall. You don't worry about crack addicts coming at you on the street. It is safe. The infrastructure, the subways, the hospitals, the dentists, the insurance, the department stores, clean, friendly, lovely. It's a great place for my kids. Another reason is that I don't think the Korean story is finished yet. Korea is going places, right? Korea is on this trajectory. And not only is its future as yet unknown, I believe its past is also unknown. It hasn't really worked out its past. It's still rewriting its past because it's been through colonialism and civil war and the North-South. All of that is still going on. So the past isn't finished. The future is still yet unknown. So it's a very dynamic place. And if I consider trajectories, Korea's trajectory is like this. And for those who might just listening, I'm giving a steep angle, going upwards with my hand. I come from Britain, a country steeped in tradition, culture. It's the home of Shakespeare. It's the home of Marlowe, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Ed Sheeran, wherever you want to go.
Right.
But I think that's on a completely different trajectory, that country. I think that country is perhaps falling, slipping. It's not where it once was. And so I felt that Korea is going places, and I don't want to, this is really important, I don't want to control Korea's destiny, not that I could. I don't want to give suggestions. I just want to observe it. I want to go along for the journey and see how Koreans take their country forward. That fascinates me.
But that's fascinating. I've never heard it that way, and very encouraging. You know what I do, and I do look at Korean society, but I look at it just like you in a positive light. That's my own culture as well. But you're right. You hear sometimes the dark side of things. So honestly, your perspective is refreshing, David, because you will sometimes people get in that rabbit hole of like, here's what's wrong, blah, blah, blah. But you have this, I guess, optimism and positivity. So I'm assuming you bring that into your teaching. So talk about some of what you teach. Yes, Korean studies, but that's pretty vast, right? That's pretty broad. Be specific on some of the courses that I want to take, by the way.
Let me always welcome. Let me just say about that positivity. There's two views of South Korea that seem to resonate really well. One is called the Hallyu view, and this is just everything's terrible and it's dystopia. And those articles and those views, they're really popular in the Wall Street Journal, in the Guardian. And I think it's because Western audiences, they feel a bit better about themselves. So they're like that. And it makes them feel a little bit safer about their own cultures. I'm really curious why those articles do so well and resonate so well in the West. The other view of Korea is this view called the Gukbong view. Gukbong means, the translation is like national methamphetamine, but Gukbong is like this, Korea is amazing, #1 Korea, fighting, let's go. Everybody is an oppa. Like people come there, like everybody on the street is going to look like Jo Gyu-sung or something like that, or Jimin. Neither of those perspectives are true, right? Korea is a real place, and people have like toothaches, and they have like tuition to pay, and they have, exercise routines. That's the reality of Korea. So I always try to address to my students, like, Korea is not as good as the government says it is. Korea is not as bad as a lot of Western media or Twitter will tell you it is. Korea is somewhere in the middle, and that's okay. That's my perspective on Korea. So I'm very positive and I support it, but it's trying to get to the real Korea.
But the real truth is, David, that's normal. Like nobody can have it totally, completely, woo, it's awesome, like, Hotel California, and then have like the Hallyu, which I've heard. It's got to be that balance, right? And so I like that you said that. And I don't know why, but when you were sharing, because I like to be emotional and I'm in touch with my feelings. No, I got a little bit teary-eyed because, again, I'm going to point this out, and maybe, I don't know if people have said this to you, but it means a lot to me as a Korean American who grew up in the US, born in Seoul, but grew up in the US, where that identity, right? That dual cultural identity kind of was in conflict a lot.
Yeah.
Then I see this white British male telling me about Korea. And I know that's funny, but like 20 years ago, I never would have imagined it. And then here's me who wants to take one of your classes, which I keep, by the way, folks, I do. I'm like, can I take one of your classes to learn from you? Because I want that perspective of someone technically who, you know, came from the outside in and is seeing from your eyes. It's so heartwarming. Just had to share it. So that's important. I'm glad you said that. And I'm glad you gave both perspectives. So a little bit of what you teach, because I know you bring in some pop culture. You're talking cultural, what's going on, the trends. We talked about the K-dramas, and, you know, I know you can't watch all of them, but how do you bring in what's currently trending and then kind of meshing that with history, like you mentioned?
So many questions. By the way, I'm picking up all your tangents. I'll try to address them all. I've been thinking recently about Korean citizenship. About actually becoming Korean, and how Korean could I become? But it's a thought, you know, going around my mind, because I'm at the stage where I could do it. You know, there are certain things that you have to go through, but I could legally become Korean. And I know there's these questions of ethnicity, but it's something like, it's not to get one up on the other people, but it's more like to say, well, I think that's the right thing to do in terms of respecting the language, the culture, and the civilization. And yeah, and I completely get where you're coming from. By the way, I read Crying in H Mart, which is a wonderful exploration of identity. And I sent it to my mum for a Christmas present. I'm not sure if she's read it yet, but so many people I see that are reconnecting with their Koreanness because now they feel a sense of confidence, or they feel welcome, whereas once 20 years ago they might have avoided it because of negative connotations. So I'm really glad that whatever Korea is doing is also helping people like yourself and other people around the world. They might not even be Korean, but it's helping them with their own identity as well. Korea can be a great source of comfort, sanctuary, community, and solace for a lot of people. And I think the success of Hallyu proves that, and I'll use that as a segue to answer your question about what I teach. So I teach courses in contemporary Korean studies, modern issues in Korea, East and West culture, digital media communication, and Hallyu. I also teach during breaks gender and society and Korean history and culture. So there's so many different courses I teach. Sometimes the content's a little bit overlap, but when I teach things, and take, for example, I'm teaching contemporary Korean studies, and I'll teach students, and it's wonderful to do. I'll say, right, this is a 3-hour lecture. We're doing feminism today, and then we're doing mental health, and then we're doing LGBT rights, and then we're doing North Korea, and these are all such hot button topics, you know. And we're doing a 3-hour deep dive. To do these issues, you need to understand Korean history and culture, because I think if you say, well, look, it's 2023, yes, and this is Korea's status with women's rights or gay rights or mental health, and this is what Sweden's doing or France is doing, it's not a fair test, because you need to account for history and culture. You need to account for the fact that some countries were going around the world colonizing people, but they were going around and imparting their culture and their flags on different people, and other countries were being colonized and they were having this. So I find it so important that students know Korean history, Korean culture, going from the very origin myths, going through all the, slavery in Korea wasn't really outlawed until 1894. Right, the Joseon dynasty, that beautiful thing you see in all the sageuk. People say there was about 40% slaves during that dynasty. That's a big slave population, man. That's 120, 30 years ago. It's not long.
No.
And no, it's not. And so I think if you're going to look at it, you need to understand where it's come from, to understand where it is. And so when I teach these courses, even when I do Hallyu, I look at the dramas, I look at the K-pop. I don't start with K-pop. I start with gugak, and I start with the traditional music, the pansori, these types of things, because you've got to understand the history and culture to get really into it. I'll say one thing about traditional Korean music, and then I'll pass it back over, because for a while I wanted to get into Korean traditional music, gugak, which means national music. And I thought I'll be all sophisticated and debonair, and I'll get really into it by listening to it. And I listened to it, I was like, I don't get it. And I'm a musician. I'm like, I should be able to get it. So I spoke to a great practitioner and scholar on it. Her name is Jocelyn Clark, and she's educated at Harvard, and she teaches here in Korean music. And she said, David, most of Western music is based on a 4/4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And it's based on this heartbeat. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. She was like, no, traditional Korean music, it's this 12 beats, because there's spring, summer, autumn, winter, 3, 3, 3, 3, making up 12. And the beat is on the 1 and the 9. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, hut, 10, 11, 12, 1. And I was like, okay. And I listened to it. I was like, what? To understand Korean music, you need to understand the framework. To understand modern Korea, you've almost got to get yourself into that Korean mindset and watch things and see things through Korean eyes. And then slowly it starts making sense to you. Because I find that if you watch a lot of dramas and movies, I know you asked me about them. So I said, I'll hand it over. Give me. I started watching all these Korean movies. And at the end, I kept seeing people dying and committing suicide. And everyone was like, yay. I'm like, that's not what's meant to. James Bond is meant to kill the bad guy, get the girl, and go off into the sunset. But in Korea, there was these different things. At the end of 200 Pound Beauty, it's an old movie.
I've seen it. Yeah, it's good.
You've not, you know Beauty and the Beast, right? You know the story of Shrek. In the Korean version, the woman, she's a large lady. She's fat and unattractive, but has the voice of an angel. She goes to a doctor who makes her incredibly thin and beautiful. She becomes the top pop star in the country. She gets the guy, and that's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
She doesn't go back to being fat and everybody likes her for the beauty inside. It's like, no, beauty is on the surface, and that's how you do it. And if you watch that movie through your own eyes, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But if you watch it through Korean eyes, people are like, yeah, that's
Makes
it.
sense. So yeah, well, I mean, that was, gosh, you said so much. So let's talk about you listed all the courses you took, and then so we just kind of ended on that note with Korean film, 200 Pound Beauty. Hallyu, because that's technically my space, but I love everything else you said, and I completely love the fact that there is a framework. I'm also having to not even relearn, I should say learn, because I didn't learn this stuff growing up. I grew up learning American history, right? World history, not really Asian American studies, and that's a whole nother topic here in the US, but I didn't get that. So even as I'm looking at current day trends, I do go backwards, going, wait, what did it look like 20 years ago? And so that said, when you're talking about Hallyu and what you're teaching now, we know it's fairly recent, and you looked at the music. So tell me a little bit about your own trajectory as you were discovering the traditional Korean, Hansori, and then what was after that? See, this is fascinating stuff. Like, I know of those two, but then what's in between before K-pop?
You get with the Korean War. So you'll get all these recordings during the colonial period. There you're getting sort of jazz and big band music, but the music scene really starts taking off when you get the American forces coming in after they've dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the colonial period. By the way, most Koreans are not taught about that. They're like, how did you get rid of Japanese colonization? They'll say, Anjonggun, like, we did it. Different story. History is a bit different here, but the American soldiers come in and they bring rock and roll, and Korean people learn to start playing that music based on the 4/4, as I described earlier, like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis, that kind of stuff, T-Bone Walker. They start doing that on army bases because they can get paid bank by doing that. So they start doing that, and then they start incorporating their own versions of it. So you get Shin Jung-hyun and all of these artists. Now, Korean psychedelic music in the 60s and 70s is amazing, right? It blew my mind to discover, because you think 60s and 70s, you might think, the Pink Floyd, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Doors, all of this kind of stuff. And the West had this kind of hippie movement where it was really experimenting, getting psychedelic. Korea was doing it as well. And it sounds fascinating. And it doesn't sound cheap. It doesn't sound underproduced. It doesn't sound like a carbon copy. It's amazing. But there was a military dictator that just took over the country and said, there's an existential threat of communism. We can't have people sitting around smoking weed and going, hey, everybody's lovely, hallelujah. You need to stop that, and you need to get to work. There's a whole different trajectory that could have happened, a parallel, future. Korean cinema, there's a 1960 movie called The Housemaid. the 1960 version.
Oh, okay, because I've seen the more recent version, but yeah.
The 1960, and you watch that and you're like, this is 1960. At that time, Korea was so much potential, but there were these dark years, and they were dark years artistically, like the 70s and the 80s, because the focus was not on the arts or the culture. The focus was on, there's an existential threat of communism there. They're going to come and try to get us. Because in the beginning, North Korea was more developed than South Korea. And so they had to develop, and that meant that if you were making songs or films, they had to be approved by the government, and they had to be ideologically pure. And so there's this kind of Korea, in terms of Hallyu, it always had that. There's been this creativity, this ability to produce amazing, interesting stuff. It just went away for 20, 30 years while they had to build semiconductors and get to all this 5G broadband, amazing technology that they have now.
Yeah. Wow. I just got a history lesson, by the way. That I saw all your excitement. So that's to me, I'm learning so much here. And so I'm trying to formulate my thoughts, but let's talk a little bit about, you and I first met and we talked about, you know what I do. And then you mentioned mental health. That, to me, from what I know, here's the Korea that I know, that I kind of grew up with, visiting every summer. It wasn't talked about, and that's kind of still what's happening. But I want to know, what in the inner circle of where you're at, what does mental health look like today, more today's time in 2023? Is it still stigmatized, for instance? Is there still like a hush hush tone about it? Do people struggle to find the help that they need still? I'm curious, because based on the K-dramas we see and K-pop, like BTS, that talk about it, I feel it's changing, but I want to know if that's real.
I think, and I'm going to say this let me start this way. It's not hard to find mental health help in South Korea. Actually, it's quite easy. There's no lack of counselors or sangdam or counseling or appointments or doctors, practitioners. The universities have all of these offices and time slots, and every week they're filled up, and private practices and things like that. So there is an availability, and with insurance, it's not expensive. There used to be this stigma, and there still is, amongst people of a certain age. Like, so if you get people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they're going to say to you, you shouldn't talk about mental health. It's tamda, like bear it, keep it in, and don't reveal it. And that's the way you do it. That's the way you deal with it.
So they still say that, even in the 30s, 30-year-olds?
Well, no, I think maybe even 30s are different. And what you'll find, according to the academic literature, sorry, it's a bit boring, but according to the actual academic literature and research studies, the people most likely to seek mental help in South Korea are, first, women, first people aged 20 to 40, and those with university education or more. Right. So there are certain demographics. There's a population of about 50 million in South Korea. And when we say, are Koreans still doing this? Well, it's like, are we talking about the Koreans in Gangnam? Are we talking about the people that are working down in the traditional markets? Are we talking about the people in the countryside? There is, who is a Korean really? Because there's 50 million different Koreans. More and more young people are getting it. Young people at universities will openly talk about, I'm going to do some counseling, and before I do my presentation, I'm going to pop a couple of pills, and here I go. Now, that's not typical of every Korean experience, but you wouldn't have heard that 10 years ago. There has been this change in terms of, I'm getting mental help, I'm doing therapy, I'm taking pills, I'm doing all this. That's now here, and it wasn't 10 years ago. I will say, and I say this with some trepidation, knowing your professional work, but I've seen it in K-pop. And I was also speaking to a mutual acquaintance, perhaps a friend, Hanyang, about this. And she said that in K-pop, everyone's just commodifying trauma. Like, this is something that we could say, if we talk about mental health or if we talk about issues, then people are going to love it. It's almost as if mental health has been, in the Hallyu industry, commodified and packaged, and if you deal with those issues, it's going to resonate with young people. So this might be having positive effects in helping people come to terms with their own struggles and challenges, but it also at the same time might be commodifying problems and making social issues out of it. For example, just one last point, I will often see on social media, or some of my international students, they might have various things in their social media profile. They'll have their pronouns, which is not in South Korea. I asked some of my South Korean students, like, because they didn't know about it. So I was like, do you want to know my sexuality and pronouns? And they went, no, David, what are you, Professor? They were like, we don't want to know anything about that, Professor. Like, shut up. You're
so
weird.
You still don't have, people don't ask over there, what are your pronouns?
I asked the international students, and they're like, yeah, that's important to us. Such differences. And it's the same with mental health. I might see in some international social media bios, it might say like bipolar, ADHD. It might use these things. I'm sure you've seen it yourself.
Yeah.
In South Korea.
And on the Gen Z population, but yeah.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so hold on. When you say international now, so you teach both international and South Korean students?
Some classes are predominantly international. Some classes are predominantly Korean. The best ones are when they're mixed.
I would agree. Tell me about who are your Korean students that are taking what classes? I guess I'm curious to who's taking what, right? Like, what are they choosing? So what's the classes that are predominantly Koreans?
The classes at Seoul Women's University are predominantly Korean. There's not a big international. There are, last semester I had some fabulous students from Vietnam, from Taiwan, and from America and Japan at Seoul Women's University, but the international community there is smaller. One of my American students last semester at Seoul Women's in East and West culture, we were talking about cultural appropriation, which just isn't a thing here in South Korea. And
yeah,
I won't say her name, but this American student, blonde, blue eyes, beautiful young woman, she was telling us about how she went to Gyeongbokgung, and if you go to the Korean palace, if you rent a hanbok, the traditional dress, you can get in for free. But she was like, I couldn't do that, because if I do that and post a photo, I'm going to get torn apart by my classmates for cultural appropriation when I go back. And all the Korean students were just looking at her going, what? So I asked one, let's just say her name was Jisoo, it wasn't. I said, Jisoo, how do you feel about your classmate America not wearing a hanbok because of this? And she said, not only do I want you to wear a hanbok, I will tell you which color will best match your hair, and I will take the photos for you. We need to go and put you in a hanbok right now. This cultural appropriation doesn't
exist.
That's why the conversations and the mixture of cultures are brilliant, because you suddenly realize, and the American students are saying this, I didn't realize there were different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah.
And the Korean people are doing the same. And then you get to that question, well, which one is right? Because they're so fundamentally different, and it shouldn't necessarily be that this one takes precedent. Certainly in Korea, the Korean one should generally have precedent, but that's how that works out. I do find that in general, a lot of the values of Korean students are very different from international students. Hanyang has a far greater international student body there, and I actually had to open up a whole new class just for the international students by themselves.
What are they most interested in taking? Are they run the gamut of all the courses you take, or the Hallyu, or what's your most popular class?
Contemporary Korean studies, dealing with all those kind of the feminism, the gender, the sexuality, the Hallyu, the North Korea, the mental health. Those ones are the popular ones, I think.
I could see that. That's the one I want to listen in on, so I can learn. Okay, so I have to go back to what you said about cultural appropriation. You're right. The outside of South Korea, when I say, okay, so Westerners see something, they're like, oh my gosh, did you see this person wearing this wig or hanbok, right? Yes, I do. I did learn recently, I'll just be honest, maybe in the last year or two, that with South Koreans, they love it when you're wearing, they go, we think it's so cool that we see a Black woman wearing a hanbok. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, it's so cool that there's now photos. And I'm like, I should have done that. No, I didn't have time. It was also 105 degrees when I went. There's no way I could have worn that. But I think that's cool. So you're right. Seeing from different perspectives is what I believe is real. I mean, people may feel, let's talk from a mental health perspective. Your reality is definitely, your perception is a reality. So in some sense, when someone tells me, no, that's not what it is, I'd be like, there is a certain way that I feel when I'm like, but that's the way I see it, or this is what I believe. These are my core values. So in that sense, you said something very interesting. The Koreans think differently than the international students. Can you give me an example that perhaps we see in our K-dramas?
To give you some examples, by the way, just I'll think of that. But when you talked about cultural appropriation and a person wearing a hanbok, for example, you might know the term Koreaboo, right? Are you familiar with the term Koreaboo? Koreans have not heard of the term Koreaboo, and I'll tell them, is it possible for a foreigner to love Korea too much? And they'll go, no. Please love us more. Like this idea of loving Korea too much, to many Koreans, it's like, no, like we want the love. We don't get like, I will sometimes show this with Hallyu specifically. I'll sometimes show this graph of soft power charts. So where countries rank in the world according to soft power. And this is their cultural influence around the world, not hard power like tanks and guns, but, you know, the movies and music and ideas. And Korea, according to different ones, it generally ranks around 9th, 10th, 11th, right? And I'll show this chart, and Korean people will look at that and they'll, excuse me, professor, why isn't Korea number one? That's the wrong, that's the wrong chart. Korea number one. There's this idea, there's this sense of, you know, confidence that Korea should be, and that's why they want the people to wear the hanboks, to wear the arirang.
But I'm surprised it's 9. I'm sorry, it really is 9 or 10?
According to different ones, 9th, 10th, 11th. I mean, we sometimes get it fixed, but look
one or
Japan,
two. One is obviously
Germany, Japan. They're very high. I mean, Japan has Sony, Nintendo, and Pokemon and things like this. These, let's not get it twisted, right? I don't want to get into that conversation, but
look at me. I was surprised. I'm like, what? It's number 9.
There's the Korean in you coming out, right? I often make this joke. This is a bit sensitive, but I often make this joke because I also teach a history of drugs and tattoos in my contemporary Korean studies, because these are big things, right? Many international students will come from countries where, you know, you can smoke weed recreationally, and going to university is part of exploring your third eye and going on trips and things. Not for everybody, but it is for some. In Korea,
no,
that's just a no-go. But I've often joked, because it grows naturally here, and it was here until about the 1970s when the government banned it. Like old timers will tell you of going down the roads on the bus and just putting out your hand and grabbing a handful of weed in bags and things. It grows indigenously here. If Korea ever legalized marijuana, I think there would be this desire amongst all Korean, we must be the #1 weed smoking country in the world. Let's go. You're not smoking fast enough, Mr. Kim. Come on.
I might have something to say. It's a mental health clinician. No, it's all good. Overdoing. No, but that's funny. I didn't even know that it was grew there. Okay, that's interesting. Fascinating.
You asked me for one difference, so I'll just give you this difference. How do things change? If we think about feminism and gender, for many Europeans and Americans, there's this idea of liberal feminism. And what this means is that men and women should abide by the same rules. There's this idea that there should be this equality, and that's what it is, right? I find in Korea, the one that resonates most with the Korean women, as well at Seoul Women's University, is this version of standpoint feminism, which is essentially men are from Mars, women are from Venus, which means we're different. We don't understand each other. There should be different rules and practices in society for us. So the West tries to focus, I'm generalizing the West here. The West will try to focus on equality, whereas Korea is acknowledging the physical differences. The West will see gender as a verb. You take this back to Simone de Beauvoir or Judith Butler. Gender is something you perform. One is not born a woman, one becomes a woman, is the classic start. That your gender is something that you enact. In Korea, it's completely biological. Like it still goes down on those lines. And this is not, again, wrong or right. They're just two different perspectives. And this comes down,
values or whatever, you know. Okay, so on the feminism, I have to ask, because I talked to some, when I say young women, younger than me, but Gen Z, Gen Z population, or MZ as people like to say too as well. They talk a lot about feminism in Korea, but it's very is divisive, the word I want to say. They hesitate they share that they struggle even sharing an opinion because they're worried that they'll be labeled a feminist, and to be labeled that is not good, even though they want to speak up and show some of their own opinions and thought processes. I hope I'm wording this correctly, but basically I'm sensing that the feminism term in South Korea, not necessarily a good thing. You tell me. I would love to hear your perspective. This is from young women I'm talking to.
Yeah, the F word. If you say it in Korean society, people might fall off their chair. You know, feminism is. There's a difference between the way the word feminism resonates in society and the conversation about equality and women's rights. Feminism is associated in South Korea with some people with a form of radical feminism, with a form of sometimes misappropriated or seen as a form of misandry, seen as very challenging, aggressive. It's not simply we want there to be equal rights for men and women. It's seen differently here, and that's how the word has grown. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. That's just the way it is. Now, there's this fascinating thing, and so you might watch saguks or traditional dramas, and you see the women strolling around the palaces in beautiful hanboks, right? But then we don't have it here. But look at a photo of a tangot and realize that women were often covered head to toe in South Korea. Might be that you see what's happening in countries like Iran or Afghanistan now, where women are being forced to cover themselves head to toe, not leave the house without a male escort and be confined. In Korea, that was called the anbang. The idea was called bubu yubyol, and men were the public sphere, women were the private. They were covered head to toe. They were kept secluded. That was until about 120 years ago. So it's not very long ago. Again, the dramas don't give you the real, they give, if you hire a K-pop star, you need to show their face and show them beautiful. That's not the history though. One last point on this, which is really important. In 1948, when the South Korean nation was founded, August the 15th, the Constitution gave women all full political, social, cultural, legal rights. It gave them to them. Now, this is a good thing, but at the same time, it didn't allow women to fight for their rights. And in 1948, women didn't have any, like they had it on paper, but in reality, in society, did they have any sort of decent life? Not really. And so by just giving them the rights, it didn't allow them to say, we want these rights. When you see all the women's movements in the 60s, the 70s, the second wave of feminism, that was because the West had already, for the most part, modernized. It had the culture there. And so you might know Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something like that. Yeah. They had the physical stuff. So then they wanted the abstract stuff, the equality, the justice, the freedom. During that time, South Korea was still busy with the physical stuff, right? So now it's got all the physical stuff, and it's like, now we want the abstract stuff. Now we want the equality, the freedom, the justice. And so South Korea is experiencing second wave feminism, safety in the workplace, sexual harassment, Me Too, experiencing second wave feminism through fourth wave feminism content, which is social media. And you know what social media does to any conversation?
Sure. Of course. Yeah. And through Hallyu, the wave of Hallyu, like content, K content. Let's go there now. K dramas. And you know how I use them. Yes, I use them from a mental health perspective. That's mainly it. But there's a lot that those stories and the K dramas tell us about ourselves, just what's happening in Korea. Though I will say, you see a lot of strong females in the K dramas. For instance, did you see Under the Queen's Umbrella?
A little bit. I haven't watched it all.
But okay. I feel like that might be
Kim Il-soo.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Kim Il-soo, you can't hide her. She was strutting around the palace, like was her, like literally strutting and running and doing everything, not really what you're supposed to, right? We knew that in that time. But we see the strength and how she was this mother tiger, mother bear that for her boys, that she really protected them. My whole point is we see that. Do you talk about that in your classes, meaning, right, those different representations, but then Korea, the real life Korea, what does that look like? So I guess I'm wondering if there's any of that conflict in your courses or the discussion, Feminism.
Korea is getting better in terms of women's rights. So like under the previous administration, the foreign minister, Kang Kyung-hwa, was a woman. The justice minister, Chu Mi-ae, was a woman. The head of the COVID response, Dr. I want to say Jung Kyung, but I
Hmm.
might get that name, was a woman.
better than me.
The head of McDonald's Korea CEO, a woman. Puma Korea CEO, woman. Women in powerful positions are
And
increasing.
Samsung too. Didn't they recently have a CEO or something like that? I forget which company, maybe. One of them.
North Korea, they're getting lots of women in powerful positions as well. But you ask about the dramas, and now first wave Korean dramas were all about the Cinderella story. And there are still Cinderella stories that resonate. I'm thinking of the one with Jisoo from Blackpink and things like that. Was that
Oh, yeah.
Snowdrop?
Sure.
Snowdrop, I think.
Snowdrop.
There are still those Cinderella elements, and they still resonate. People like those, especially people that don't just want to turn on a drama and see like sex and dragons in the first 10 minutes, right?
Right.
There are some people with middle class values that want that. You get 12 episodes, and on the final one, they kiss on the lips, and that's it.
Yes.
There is still
Or
that
they finally
Korean
hold
drama.
hands. Yeah, yeah. All of that. That's what makes appeal to K-dramas. Mm-hmm.
But the strong women, that reflects, what that reflects is that the market for these dramas is often women. And
Right.
women now, they want girl boss. They want that girl summer. They want yassification. They want all of these things. They want to see that. And the other part of this is that the people writing and producing these dramas are also women. They're the main screenwriters. And it's the same with Korean literature, I would suggest as well. Literature and dramas are being dominated by women. And so what you have here, Jeannie, is women telling stories for other women. And so, of course, there's going to be lots of this strong women. I'm thinking here of Mine, which was a great drama playing out all the power and intrigue. Another one might be Bojagwon, which was chief of staff that had Shinmina.
Yeah, I didn't get to see that one. Yeah.
Season one
Filming.
is wow.
Is it? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ethan Jez in it. Yeah.
But
There's so many, basically.
Women's changing position in society. Women now have different economic resources. They have financial independence. They have careers. They go to university. And so there's a question like, are the dramas reflecting the societal changes, or are the dramas encouraging societal changes yet to come? Are they promoting a vision of what should be, or are they just a mirror reflecting what is? I think it's more of a mirror. I think they're showing these changing things. So, but I agree with you. Lots of strong women, lots of strong performances.
Yeah. And what are you watching? I have to ask. Like, or what's the latest thing you watched or enjoyed?
I started to watch a little bit of The Glory. And I watched about 20 minutes. I was like, nah, this is not really for me. I must admit, like that bullying, I could just see how it was going to play out. And you're all about mental health. And I looked at that and I thought, this is not good for me, to be honest.
I'm actually very surprised I got through it. I did it more of as an analysis, but I will say Koreans and globally, it did quite well.
I think everything Korea does quite well. There's this
well,
meme
it was
that
well received. It was well received. Aside from the abuse, I mean that yes, first episode horrific, triggering. You know, I don't recommend it. I mean, I don't recommend that drama. Someone actually, someone actually said, "Oh, Jeannie, it just hit #1 globally. Can you talk about that?" I go, I did a reel on it highlighting bullying, but I'm not going to emphasize this drama as something I recommend. So I respectfully declined to write something on it. Because that's out of my, yes, it's not something, it's triggering, right? It's not something I say, watch for your mental health. No way. But it did well in Korea, from what I see, aside from the abusive part where they were like, that's horrific, right?
It's got star power behind it. It's got all that. It's going to be pushed on your Netflix algorithm. There was that meme that I saw the other day, which I love, which you guys would stan a squirrel if it was Korean. And I thought that was brilliant. Like, it's a Korean drama, so people are going to watch it. That's a bit facetious, but I think there's some element of truth to it. Park Chan-wook 감독님, brilliant director. His latest movie, Decision to Leave, I watched that and was blown away by it. That's a masterful piece of Korean cinema. So I watched that. And this is perhaps more Asian American than Korean, but everywhere,
everything all at once. Everything everywhere all at once.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's winning awards. So I'm glad to see that too. It getting the recognition. But even as Asian American, it's still our culture. It's great to see that, So yes, she won the Golden Globe, or they both did, the supporting actor as well.
Yeah,
So,
I just thought it was a fantastic movie. So they're the two that I've watched recently. I haven't hit a Korean drama for a while, but I know when I go back to the semesters in March, when we
mhm.
start up again, that
Well,
it's
what was your last one that you saw besides The Glory? It wasn't Uyong, was it? That's the last one you and I talked about, but that was a long
No,
time.
Reborn Rich has been one, and I've
Ah,
not really sat down with Reborn Rich yet. I've
ah,
watched
okay.
Tal. In Korea. It's very popular to watch Tal, which is clips on YouTube, and
Yeah.
so I've gone through some of them, but
Mhm.
Reborn Rich is probably the last one.
Okay. All right. Well, cool. Well, lastly, I got to ask about your podcast, Korea Deconstructed. Talk a little bit more about that. What brought you to that point, and what are some of your favorite things about doing that podcast, your favorite guests, and what's your goal for that? Like, what do you hope people get out of that?
My goal for the Korea Deconstructed podcast was that I spend all of my days and time being paid to talk. That's what I do. Television, radio, lectures. People say, David, go in there and talk. And I'm good at it. No, I don't mean to say that, but I mean, I can do it.
You
I
are
talk
good
for
at it.
3 hours at a time. I have to do these things. And so
Yeah.
what I wanted to do is I wanted to listen to people. I wanted to flip the switch. Now I came across this idea, which was don't talk about people, talk to people. And so I
Mm,
was spending all my time talking about
mm,
elements of society, gender, class, race, ethnicity, talking about people. And I thought, I've got to stop doing this, and I've got to go and talk to people, talk with people. And so that was one of the goals of the Korea Deconstructed podcast. And my goal with it is to speak to all 75 million Koreans. That includes 50 million Koreans in South Korea, 75 million, 25 in North Korea. And so that means eventually I'll be working to do season 2 in Korean. I
yeah.
did try to keep it only speaking to Korean people at first, like speak
Mhm.
to Koreans about Korea. And I kind of, there's all these questions about who is Korean and how does that work. And so I've been a little bit looser
Mm,
with that. But what I've started doing is in-person conversations this year, or in the last 4 or 5 months, and sitting down with someone and speaking to them for about 3 hours. And
wow.
for example, one episode would be speaking to a Harvard educated professor who is 65 years old for 3 hours about history and Confucianism. And then the next episode will be speaking to a young 24-year-old South Korean woman about feminism and empathy. And I love that. I'm not restricted in my subjects. I just want to get Korea from as many different perspectives as possible. I want to listen. I want the conversations to be 2-3 hours long. So by the time you get into that, you start really talking to people, I think.
I would say so. Is it like when you're talking to them for 3 hours? Is like you're recording all that?
Yeah, I never edit anything. It's just bang, there it is.
Those are probably the ones I don't watch. I'm
I,
just totally kidding.
no, absolutely. You've got all your nudist nunchi thing that
Yeah, I
keeping you
know,
busy.
no, but
We have our separate.
no, you do, but I want to learn from some of those guests too, because think about how much you are talking about and learning as they're speaking for 3 hours, and it's not just clips. You're actually having a conversation, about that. And so you're deconstructing create. That's super cool. Well, I am so glad that you gave me the chance to speak to you, and thank you for even meeting with me. That to me was very special. But we were there in the midst of what happened in that same was it kind of by that was it not that exact alley, but very close. How's that South African restaurant doing today? Because I know you're friends with them.
Me, that gentleman, one task, and Haley.
You had fun.
Yeah,
No,
no,
that
but
was a great. Yeah, are they doing okay? Yeah, because I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
need to consider that Itaewon has become a source of national tragedy with the 200 plus young people that lost their lives
Yeah.
over Halloween. And Itaewon seems to not be able to catch a break at the moment. I actually made, you listed some of my jobs at the beginning. I also work for NK News, and I also work for Asia Society. I actually made a video where I went around interviewing young people, predominantly my students, university students, about the aftermath of the Itaewon tragedy. And this is a little bit TMI, but some of those people were there, and Hanyang University actually lost 2 students. There was memorials placed up for them on the campus. So it deeply affected people around us. And I made this video just interviewing people, speaking to them. What was the reaction? How do you feel? Just candid young people speaking. And one of the organizations that I worked for said, David, we can't really publish that. That's too critical of the government. Like, what? No. And I was like, a little bit disappointed by, we need to raise young people's voices. They might sometimes be, passionate, or may say things in words or phrases we don't necessarily understand or resonate with. But I think it's important for us to listen. And sometimes conversations, there's this idea in South Korea called 시기상조, which means it's premature. Now's not the time. We'll talk about it later. And it's a way of brushing off lots of uncomfortable conversations. And I felt that was another time with Itaewon that happened. So I'm hoping young people get closure on that thing, because it feels like they can't catch a break, and these are very traumatic experiences for them.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I did not know that video, and I did a little bit of work with some folks, the journalists in Itaewon, who covered it. I did a support group for them, and yeah, that's where it's a little bit, it's not just the tragedy itself and what happened, but a lot of the surroundings of how it happened and why, right? The question is always why, and moving forward. So that's still much more to be discussed in that. But I didn't mean to end on that note, but we enjoyed that wonderful restaurant. And so I think I hope to see it back. I know they're trying to revive Itaewon, such a global mecca, right? So I'm really hoping that eventually we can, get past it in a way that'll hopefully work for everybody. And
come when it's not the middle of the summer and we're sweating.
Well, I'm still going to be coming during that time, but maybe we can go somewhere else. David, thank you so much. Any last words? I always like to say that something that you want to share that I didn't get to ask you, please do.
새해 복 많이 받으세요.
Oh yeah, 새해 복 많이 받으세요. What's your D? Like year of, is it, you're not the year of the rabbit, are you?
Like in Western zodiac, I'm a Virgo, which is obviously so appropriate for me. Virgin, pure, innocent. Check me out. So I thought when I came to Korea, they do it differently here. So I looked down the list thinking, I must be a dragon, a tiger. Check me out. I'm what they call in Korea, 상남자, very masculine man. Look down the list and
what are you?
I'm a chicken. And takti.
It means different. It means different things. Look at what the adjective means. I am a tiger.
I can believe that. I can believe that. Yeah.
But in the Western zodiac, I'm an Aquarius, which I think is kind of similar, if I had to say. But anyways, well, 새해 복 많이 받으세요. Thank you so much. I am so glad to know you, and I hope to see you in person real soon. Thank you for joining me, David. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.